You are listening to GeekFest Rants on the IC Robots Radio Network.
You have located GeekFest Rants, the entertainment podcast for genre geeks like you.
Shall we play a game?
Covering the world of vintage and current film and television since 2010.
Game over, man! It's game over!
Featuring in-depth conversations on sci-fi, horror, fantasy, comics, toys, and conventions.
So say we all! So say we all!
And now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show.
Luke Skywalker was just a farm boy until he received a mysterious message from a princess.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
She's beautiful.
Star Wars, starring Mark Hamill.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper?
Harrison Ford.
Boring conversation anyway.
Luke, we're gonna have company!
I think we took a wrong turn.
Carrie Fisher.
Good luck.
Alec Guinness.
You can't win, Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
20th Century Fox presents the most extraordinary motion picture of all time, Star Wars.
Here's where the fun begins.
No legendary adventure of the past could be as exciting as this romance of the future.
Here they come.
May the Force be with you in Star Wars.
Hi everybody and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone, and today we are going to be discussing Star Wars books. Specifically, we're going to try to hit some of the original tie-in adaptations, if you will, of the books based on the films that came out. You know, not so much the EU. We are going to hit some EU things that are kind of like the big ones, the ones that are more special to us, but we want to try to compare, you know, how some of these books differ from their particular films, and specifically how the books, through their different authors, are allowed to put in additional information that was not necessarily in the script or basically written by George Lucas. So let's get started with Star Wars books.
Klaatu, Miranda,
You must burn the books, Montag. The books have nothing to say.
When I was your age, television was called books.
You, Mr. Bemis, are a reader. A reader? A reader. A reader of books, magazines, periodicals, newspapers.
Joining me once again, I have Steve on the line. Hi Steve, how are you?
Hey, Carlos. Hey, everyone.
Today, we are going to hit Star Wars books. Now, specifically, we're going to try to focus on how the canon works with Star Wars book, which that being the primary building blocks, I guess, of what is canon would be the books that are actually based on the films, which have gone through many different authors. Some of them were ghostwriters, some of them are repeats, some of them are one-shots, some of them return in different incarnations for the EU. But I guess the only way to start this is from the beginning. Steve, why don't you tell us about Star Wars by George Lucas, this new writer called George Lucas that nobody ever heard about.
This up-and-coming upstart here, George Lucas.
The next Stephen King.
At the time, actually, he was a young and coming upstart. So
yeah, I guess it works. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, in fact, before I begin, I just wanted to actually give everyone kind of like, you know, the reasons why I wanted to kind of dig into this topic a bit. So back in 2012, when Star Wars and Lucasfilm itself really was sort of bought out by Disney, or sold to Disney rather, Disney went ahead and made the creative decision to remove and to sort of momentarily invalidate all of the books that had accompanied the movies prior. So after Return of the Jedi, there was sort of a lull period in sort of anything in regards to like canon about, you know, Star Wars or anything. And after that, in the early 90s, there was a sort of revitalization and a few books started trickling out. You know, most notably was the Heir of the Empire series by Timothy Zahn.
Yeah.
And that was sort of like the big, you know, and the success of that was sort of kind of like opened the doors to having this, you know, hey, wait a minute, we have this, you know, rich culture and rich history of Star Wars here. Let's play in that. So all the books started to emerge, and it sort of created this whole, what they would call the expanded universe of Star Wars, where it sort of expanded upon what George had laid out in episodes 4, 5, and 6. So there was a bunch of books and stories, and there were many authors that sort of dipped their hands into this new playground, and they started writing stories, and all these new branching storylines started developing, and it really got inflated into this huge sort of microcosm of different type of stories, and Luke going off and finding X, Y, and Z, and all these side characters were expanded upon.
I would say almost as crazy as the comics. The comics also went everywhere.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. And the comics actually, so a lot of the comics predate even the expanded, like the novelizations.
Right, but along the way, it was always separate. They always said this is one type of canon and this is another type of canon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that was the thing. In fact, George Lucas never really recognized it. He never really wanted it to be a part of the true Star Wars canon. He didn't really recognize the EU as being part of his. I mean, I think he was obviously okay with them creating their own stories and doing their own thing with it. But I think to him, he never really reconciled the two as being Star Wars movie canon with the books. So when Disney came along and they sort of removed all that, it sort of, and it had a really big following behind it. So many people, including myself, sort of grew up with the EU books, and for better or for worse, when Disney came along and undid all of that, a lot of people were crying out saying why, and they wanted to sort of have that back. So I wanted to sort of go back to the original 3 books here, look at some differences between them and the movies, and then sort of progress and go along sort of with some of the EU in the period I was describing, and then go into some of the new established canon. So to start, I wanted to we might as well start from the beginning and start with the original Star Wars novelization. And when I wanted to read all 3 back to back to back. I wanted to read, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi in sort of a linear order, so I can get kind of like the full scope of it. And there's a lot of differences actually. The novelization of Star Wars starts out itself as, I would almost want to say, it's sort of like a third party is writing it. Like, it starts out in this thing called the Journal of the Wills.
It's like an archaeological find, and
like
you're reading this weird thing you just found in a tomb or something.
Yeah, and it starts out in this whole like Journal of the Wills type prologue to it. And it makes you, and just like the movie, how in the opening, in the opening movie it starts, as episode 4, because it was added later. But the same thing in the book, where it starts out with like, from the first saga of the Journal of the Wills, and it gives you that, that really significant idea of like, this is just like a lived-in environment, and you're kind of being tossed into it, sort of medias res. So that itself, and the Journal of the Wills isn't even referenced in the original Star Wars anymore. So that was completely removed from the movie.
You gotta wait till I think you gotta wait till Rogue One actually to even hear the slightest bit.
Yeah,
and it also the good thing about it is that the smart thing about it is that it gives you the feeling that you just jumped into something like midstream. It's not like the story begins with you. It's kind of like you just jumped into something that's been going on forever, and you're just entering this world, looking around, learning new things about it, like new history of this whole story. But it's definitely not the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think sort of always enchanted me about Star Wars, because like it just tosses you in there and lets you kind of have to play catch up kind of.
Yeah.
Just to kind of take everything in. It's a really great experience. So as I was reading this, I was getting the feeling of, okay, this is definitely going to be something a bit different, because also in the first few chapters, I believe, we get the description of the Emperor, and he's not the same character you think he was portrayed to be in Return of the Jedi. And they describe him as being sort of like this politician who's kind of like manipulated by everyone. In fact, the way they describe the Emperor in the book is how Chancellor Valorum was portrayed in episode 1.
Phantom Menace. Yeah, it's almost like he's like a fallen Jedi. He's like a fallen politician who I guess at one point was good. which is very different. How he's by the time we get to Phantom Menace, it's a different take.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. He's as like conniving as
from the beginning. Yeah.
He's the one doing the manipulating. But in the opening, chapter of the book, it describes him as being kind of like this, like easily manipulated, sort of politician who had his glory, but was kind of like now, he's basically succumbed to everyone around him.
Yeah, sounds just like Valorum.
Yeah, exactly. And I was sort of, really shocked by that. I had no idea that it was, that was such a different take on it. And just going through the rest of the book, a lot of it does follow kind of beat for beat, the movie. Rather, the movie follows this rather.
Well, it's really kind of hard for any of these books that we're going to talk about to say exactly where did the writer take creative license and when did they stick to the script. This is a special book because the fact that, like we said before, it's credited with George Lucas, but it was Alan D. Foster who actually ghost wrote the book. So the question is, how much freedom did he have to expand on certain things this early in his, good
the
life of Star Wars.
Yeah. And I also found a few other things interesting where, which I guess this was added later in the special editions, but the inclusion of his friend Biggs. There was a lot more to it than what we see on screen, especially in the original cut. In the original cut,
nothing, practically just the end.
Poor guy gets like a shout out and a fiery death, basically.
Yeah.
But in the book, it goes into their friendship a lot deeper, which I'm glad they sort of added it back into the special edition, giving it a few scenes that he got.
Plus, they shot a lot of the stuff at Tatooine with him in it. So if that was part of the script, that was part of what the writer had to go on.
Yeah, right. That's true. In fact, there was that new trailer that came out by Topher Grace that you see he uses a lot of the those type of scenes where Luke and Biggs are together. And in fact, at the end of the book, it's actually Biggs who saves Luke instead of Wedge, who gets shot off and saves Luke's bacon, as they say. So so going through it, is a few more things that kind of like stuck out. Luke definitely had going toward the end. He definitely had like more of like a, I don't want to say a crush on Leia, but it was definitely something more there that wasn't as subtle as it was in the first movie. Huh. So I found that a bit odd, but so I'm definitely guessing, the story of making them brother and sister was definitely not, intended this early.
No. They had to switch gears somewhere around Empire or Jedi. They had to switch gears because there is no way in hell you're going to convince me that it was there all along.
Yeah. Despite what Lucas would want us to believe. Also, and one other thing that I noted was that, I'm not sure if you caught this, they say that in the book that Jawas were actually supposed to be sort of like related to or like connected to Sand people. Actually, like they were supposed to be like sort of like a grown up version or sort of like evolutionary like offshoot of Sand people.
Wow, no, I don't remember that. Wow.
Yeah, somehow they actually wanted to, I guess, connect the two species, I guess, which is I found kind of interesting. Because in the movie we don't get any sort of reference to that or anything. So those are the big things I found, that sort of stuck out to me in A New Hope that I really actually kind of like was like, wow, that's sort of different. So moving on to Empire Strikes Back, a few things I found where that and this was a big one really, where Yoda in Empire Strikes Back is actually blue. He's not, and it seems like they go out of his way to like describe this. Yeah, they described him as like he had this like bluish whitish skin color and definitely wasn't green.
Well, the problem was that I think, from what I remember, and there's a lot of concept art of him being much skinnier, very frail legs, bluish kind of skin, looks completely different, completely wrinkly, raisin kind of individual. And even if you go to the comic book version of the movie, they even went that far because I guess they were working out of concept material. Once they actually started doing the film and they actually put the puppet together, they realized, wait a minute, this looks different. And I actually remember that the comic book, in one of the later reprints, I believe, they adjusted the art so it looks more like the more chubby little Yoda that we know now. But that would explain, that at this stage of the game, the guy that's writing this particular book is going off of very early designs of what Yoda probably looks like.
That's interesting. Yeah, yeah. I think I know what you're referring to where you said the early concept art of Yoda, where he looks more like Gremlin, like very like ghoulish, like not ghoulish, but like very like not as friendly, not as friendly looking,
not as cute.
Yeah, right. So sort of glad they they made the change to how we see Yoda now, because I think making him too like feral like that, it didn't really look right for him. The whole training sequence with Luke and Yoda is actually expanded a bit. Like there's a few other scenes of him doing a few more exercises that were taken out of the movie.
And eventually we'll show that in deleted scenes, with the Blu-rays. We got to see some of those little bits. Is there anything about the Wampa that you remember from the novel?
Nothing too different. I know he's definitely in it. Nothing that stands out to me that was like, oh man, that they really changed that. But on Hoth though, there is an interesting bit with General Veers. In the movie, you see Veers. You don't really see what happens to him after he blows up the shield generator.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically the last we see of Veers. But there's actually a scene in the book where he is killed after they do destroy the shield generator.
I could have swore I saw some storyboards of I think either a rebel ship crashing into it.
Yeah,
is that how he's supposed to die?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
okay.
I think one of the characters, his name escapes me now, but one of the characters that we see in the movie, he crashed his snowspeeder into the head of the walker. And it sort of has like a similar fate to what we see in the movie, where the head explodes and the smoke comes out and it falls over.
Yeah, because I remember in the movie, Luke goes underneath and he cuts a hole under, throws his grenade, but then they cut to a shot of the head exploding. It's like, well, why would the head explode if he's putting the bomb in the belly of the thing?
In the body.
So that's probably what happened. They switched it around.
Yeah. And for a few more of the Imperial side, Admiral Piet, who actually remains on board in the movie, he remains on board of the Star Destroyer. He actually comes down with Darth Vader, actually, and they both storm the Rebel base together. Which is kind of cool. And interesting enough, Darth Vader's lightsaber, now I'm not sure if it continues through the whole book, but it describes his lightsaber as being blue. His lightsaber wasn't red here. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, his lightsaber was blue. And I'm not sure if they continue through the rest of the novel like that, but in the one scene, it said, his lightsaber glowed blue. I was like, wow, okay, that's
interesting.
Odd. Yeah. What struck me as odd about that is the fact that A New Hope was already filmed at this point, so and they would have known that his lightsaber would have been red. So I'm not sure why they would have switched it to blue. So that kind of
that's weird.
Yeah, that was really weird. And one of the trips toward the end, when iconic scene of when Han gets frozen in carbonite, and this obviously would have been obviously different in the book than in the movie, but in the movie we know that when Han is about to be frozen, Leia tells him I love you, and he replies with the the now famous I know.
Right.
But that was ad-libbed on set, so before obviously that happened, his line in the novelization was different, and he basically just says don't worry, I'll come back, which doesn't have that same Han Solo charm that Harrison added to it. So I thought that was kind of cool.
I'll tell you what else I find interesting about the by the time we get to that second book is that the first book was initially released, I believe, as a hardcover book. And it was part of book clubs. You could buy it through certain book clubs, and you can buy it in the store. And they did obviously put 1 million paperback versions of it out there. But I think by the time we got to Empire, they went straight to paperback. I have yet to see an American, at least, version of a hardcover The Empire Strikes Back book. Most of the stuff that's out there seems to be old paperback.
I wouldn't know, but when I was a kid, I had like a copy of like it was like one of those for kids, like abridged versions of Empire Strikes Back.
The junior novels, exactly, the Scholastics,
And I remember, and it had like in the middle of it had like little like pictures from the film and everything, and of course, obviously paperback.
Well, they always had problems especially with those junior novels, with the Scholastic ones, I believe. Especially, I remember with Return of the Jedi, because they put them out before the movie comes out. You would order your books in school. I don't know if they do this anymore. I remember in grade school that we would get a little pamphlet, like a newspapery pamphlet of all these books. And amongst those books, there were Star Wars books. So you would order those books, and like a month later, they would arrive. Well, guess what? The Return of the Jedi book came a month before the release of Return of the Jedi. So all of a sudden now, there's a lot of people out there with the entire story in the Scholastic Junior version of it to be able to read. And I remember I ran home and read that thing top to bottom. I couldn't help myself.
That's great.
It was a major spoiler, but I didn't care. I loved it.
I remember in Revenge of the Sith was coming out, they had they put out the comics before the movie actually came out. There was a 4-issue comic run, and I remember trying to like not read them, but I wanted to know anyway. So I just went ahead and bought them and read them before the movie came out. I spoiled it for myself.
Now they're a little better. I think now they're purposely not releasing certain books till after the movie comes out, to the point where they're like releasing them like a month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, which is like, wow.
I noticed that for Last Jedi Rogue One. They came out way after the theatrical release.
Yeah, it was different back then.
Okay, so we'll move on to Return of the Jedi.
Yes,
my favorite of the movies. This one, there was a few. It wasn't as big of changes, but there's a lot more like smaller things. I found it interesting that Jabba the Hutt, when Luke was trying to escape and he was threatening Jabba, basically saying, you better release me. Jabba basically infers that he's killed Jedi before him. Jabba makes a point of saying but he basically implies that you're not the first Jedi I've killed, basically, and giving it sort of this credence that Jabba that Jabba has kind of seen his fair share of Jedi, which is interesting because there really shouldn't have been so many Jedi strolling by Jabba at this point. One thing that I really enjoyed with Return of the Jedi is that they really fleshed out Mom Mothma's character. In the movie, you don't really get a lot with her. She has her her speech she gives at the end of Return of the Jedi, but you don't really see much of her. In the book, they at least focus a good page or so on her, and she's just as somber as as she is in the movie, but they kind of at least describe her a bit and give her a bit more time to kind of breathe a bit.
My favorite difference is is in Dagobah when Ben is telling Luke about who his family really is or who his family really was, and the whole thing of we hid you with my brother. It's like, what? My brother?
I was going to hit on that. Obi-Wan basically says that Owen Lars was basically his brother. And that his mother died. When they were in fact, he said that they died after they were already born, which flies in the face of what we see in episode 3. Where Padme dies and she's never seen them, but they die in childbirth basically.
Exactly.
So,
but I'm not entirely certain if this again is this Lucas or is this the writer? Who exactly? It seems like such an important thing, for James Caan, the writer, to write that. It's not like saying the color of my shoes. Okay, who cares? They're brown, they're black, they're yellow. Who cares what the color your shoes are? But such an important relationship between Ben and a brother we never heard of. I don't think you would let a writer just do that. That's not creative writing. To me, that comes from Lucas.
That sort of changes the narrative, by a lot. So it just very odd. Like what was the impetus of him making that very large change like that? So very, very, very interesting. And it also goes into how again Obi-Wan talking to Luke, saying that Anakin fell into a pit of molten lava. Yep. Which I guess technically is still true. I mean, he didn't actually fall into it. But,
as a result of a battle, okay, we can go with that.
So it tracks. And so that whole scene was really, really, really interesting.
A lot of the deleted scenes from the special editions and from the bonus material, Luke building his lightsaber, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and even the scene where C-3PO is talking to the Ewoks. And he's sort of trying to convince them to help them out. They don't actually believe. It's not the whole thing where they think he's a god at first. They don't actually believe C-3PO. So it takes Han basically to kind of convince them. And is Han is the one who says the Empire is draining all the Ewoks' resources on the planet. And then he actually convinces Wicket, the Ewok leader, to help the rebels out. I thought that kind of interesting. The fact that in the movie they sort of had C-3PO kind of be like the big impetus that the Ewoks sort of changed.
Let me go back to one quick thing that is a little off topic, but again, Luke building his lightsaber. And I don't know if we ever talked about this, but there is a theory out there. Again, this is probably a fan-created theory or for the purpose of retconning, but it's the theory that why would Luke create a green lightsaber? What would make him go to the color green in Return of the Jedi? Now, I know the reason why they went green technically, and I don't know if we ever talked about this. The reason they went technically was that originally that was supposed to be blue. It was supposed to be another blue lightsaber. But the problem they had was that when they would ignite a blue lightsaber in Tatooine, the blue sky and the blue lightsaber would kind of blend and it wouldn't pop. It wouldn't show as strong as a red, for example. So they decided to go green because, as a matter of fact, there's still some trailers out there where you see him igniting it or holding it and it's blue against the blue background. And it looks kind of weird. So technically that's why they went green. But they weren't planning on doing it. So the question then becomes, how do you retcon the story for Luke all of a sudden out of the green, creating a green lightsaber? And I think one good story going around there is that, well, Obi-Wan Kenobi's master was Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon had a green lightsaber.
Okay.
When Qui-Gon died, when he was killed, Obi-Wan gathered his remains, including his lightsaber, which is the one he used, I think, to defeat Darth Maul. And it became part of his property and part of the junk that he had hiding in Tatooine in his house. So when Luke then went back to Tatooine to create the lightsaber after Ben was already dead, he was able to scrounge parts from Obi-Wan's hut. And in there was the proper crystal, let's say, to create the green shade instead of the blue shade. So I like that retcon story, which gets you back into track of why he's got green all of a sudden.
See, I love how fans can sort of, no, it's true. Like I really wish, and not to get off my tangent, but I really wish Disney would take some of those ideas and motivation to reconnect things and make things connect. Because the biggest problem with The Last Jedi is it just didn't feel like it was connected to anything. And
do we really want to go there?
Yeah.
Do we really want to go there?
It's not have a 2-hour episode here. But that and I wouldn't even call it a retcon. That's just I don't know. That sounds good to me. I'll buy it. I really like that. And yeah, in fact, actually, now you mentioned that on the cover of the original Jedi book, Luke's lightsaber isn't even green. His lightsaber is blue.
It's blue. Yeah, I'm looking at it right here, which is part of that original poster. Yeah. And here's another bizarre thing having to do with the wrong color lightsaber. This film, of course, as everybody knows, was originally called Revenge of the Jedi. And I believe
my favorite poster. I think I know where you're going.
Yeah, the Drew Struzan poster, which has the colors completely reversed. Yeah. Luke has the red, Vader has the blue, and it's like, is this an error? And I haven't really I don't think I've been able to find a definitive answer to, was it an error or was it some kind of trick they were trying to play on everybody, to kind of generate a buzz of, wait a minute, does this mean Luke is evil now and Vader is good? Or is it just a mistake somebody made?
And another thing about that, I love that poster. That's one of my favorite Star Wars. Like I don't know why. I think I have memories of like seeing it in the theater, in the theaters where they have the hallway of like all the different movie posters.
I remember that back in '83.
And obviously my favorite movie. But another thing I noticed is that in the top of the poster, it says the saga continues, but it always struck me as weird is why wouldn't it say the saga concludes or the conclusion of the saga? It always seems odd, like it continues. Yeah.
Okay. Let me give my rant on that.
Oh, okay.
There is documentation out there because there's videos out there. You can watch the videos. When Kenner would do the what today would be considered the pitch video, the promotional video of what's coming next year to get buyers to get all hot and interested about their product, they would put these little films together highlighting their properties, and Star Wars was a gigantic property for Kenner. You can find these on YouTube. On different videos, they advertise it as, and Lucas is working on a 12-part story. 12-part story. This is back, we're talking about like by the time Empire is out or Return of the Jedi is out, they're talking about a 12-part story. Then at some point the videos change to a 9-part story. Then it becomes a 6-part story, and then by the time we're done, it's still a 3-part story. So the idea of expanding beyond 3 films was always kind of played around there, but I guess they had to wait with every film to see whether or not they would go that far. And I think what happened is by the time you get to Return of the Jedi, even though they had been dabbling with the idea of continuing with more stories, to continuing the saga, this is the time where Lucas was hitting his divorce. And he was like, I'm done with this. I'm putting this to bed. I got bigger fish to fry. I got bigger problems in my life. I'm going to take a break from Star Wars. So he kind of put everything on hold, even though internally he might have had ideas of continuing, with that story.
Interesting. Yeah, because and obviously, that makes sense to I guess in George Lucas's eyes, always have like that kind of like bigger, more of the bigger scope to it, but. That's interesting.
Even Mark Hamill, there's interviews with Mark Hamill from the 80s where he's like, well, George told me that we were going to have 9 movies or 6 movies. And it's like, wait a minute, there's 12, there's 9, there's 6, there's 3. Where exactly are we? So he was telling people all different kinds of things. And then I guess at some point he decided what to do, It changed. It fluctuated.
And that fits into George's narrative of like how much of it was actually planned out. Because there's multiple interviews of him saying, I had it all planned from the beginning. And then he's got a million ideas, and then he finally decides on one, and that's the way. But in the meantime, he's spitballing everywhere, Yeah. And just to wrap up here, there's the other 2 things I found were sort of funny. Where at the end of the book, when the Emperor and Palpatine are talking on the bridge, Palpatine is a bit more like cheeky here. He actually mocks Yoda and his speech pattern because after he finds out that Luke was still training after Obi-Wan died, he questions him saying, who trained him? And he finds out it was Yoda, and so he like openly mocks him and his talking habits, about how he phrases his speech. I found that
backwards,
pretty funny, yeah. And the other one, and I sort of had, I guess I sort of had my eye, focused on like the Imperials because I'm a big fan of the Empire. So I found Moff Gerard, who's the character we see in the beginning of Return of the Jedi. Yep. He has a few other extra kind of scenes, which again are filmed, and I think in deleted scenes. And he has like a sense that he's like kind of like full of himself, and he has a few extra scenes where he's like trying to be kind of, I guess, like more important than he really is. And so I really wish we would have kept like a lot of those extra scenes in, because they kind of flesh out the characters that we see. They're just kind of like background characters basically. But so that's what I pulled from the first 3, the original trilogy books. And so I'm not going to go into it as exhaustively with the EU books and the new canon books. I just wanted to kind of like go through a few, kind of look at them, see if you've read any of them, Carlos, or if you have any opinions on them. And I guess the overall question is, when Disney took over, Lucasfilm, when they bought Lucasfilm, when Lucasfilm sold them, yes. I don't want to make it sound like it was like this hostile takeover. And why, in your opinion, would you think that they wanted to kind of wipe the slate clean and kind of erase all of basically everything that came before, and then proceed to kind of cherry pick things one by one to bring it to canon?
Well, between this period of the beginning of the EU all the way up to Disney taking over, let's say, there have been a lot of incidents having to do with writers going into areas. Now, granted, they go into areas that they have to get approval for. When a writer who's going to work for Lucasfilm, the writing division, the publishing division, they are told, don't touch this character, don't touch that character, and don't touch that character. And they have to go by that, or else those things don't get published. But I remember there were a number of incidents where a lot of things having to do with the clones, the clone army and how clones behave, that started to contradict the stuff that was happening in the Clone Wars animated series. And I forget the name of the writer, but I think that particular writer got really bent out of shape that they were contradicting his creativity by Lucasfilm then doing the animated show and doing things differently. So that kind of started to create these camps of people that are all like, well, the EU is much better than these cartoons, or the EU is much better than these prequels. The EU is much better. And you had like tribalism starting to take place. Which
imagine that.
Wow. That's a good thing it doesn't happen these days. But yeah, there was a big hubbub about that where people were becoming, I'm all EU, screw the rest of Star Wars. It's no good. The EU is where it should be at, that kind of stuff. And yeah, there was was a lot of stuff like that. A lot of contradictory stuff would happen. A lot of things that didn't match up between the, because Lucas created the canon of the films, which would then be followed by the canon of the television shows, animated shows. Then it would be followed by the canon of, whatever, these other lower tier canons.
There's a definite hierarchy to sort of what is considered, master canon, I guess.
Exactly. And I think with Disney, they had the opportunity to just wipe the slate clean, like you said, and said, all right, we're starting from scratch, and we're going to select what's canon and what's not canon, which gives them an opportunity, to start from the beginning again if they want to. It's up to them. But I think that's why. Yeah,
and that's why I took from it as well, because there's a lot of the... a lot of the books that I read, depending on the author of the certain book, they were kind of given, I guess, sort of freedom to sort of write, especially in the beginning. They're given sort of a wide range of what they can do with the characters.
Yeah, and I think they got more restrictive later because they knew that they had prequels coming out.
Yeah.
And then with the television shows, they were like, oh crap. We have to kind of rein this in because we are going to have contradictions if we allow them to dabble into this particular side of the universe, and we're about to tell all these stories. So I think that's when things started to feel a little more restrictive and a little more difficult. It's because they were spinning like 5 different plates at the same time.
Yeah, right. One of my favorite EU series is the X-Wing series, where it was basically the stories of like Wedge and Rogue Squadron, basically, and and their misadventures. And there was like a good, I want to say a good 8 or 9 series book series that would tell like the stories of what Rogue Squadron was doing on these different missions. I really wish they would bring some of those back because they were really great, really well in-depth stories of these characters. But then there were other series in the EU where it just seemed like the author just wanted to sort of, make his impact on the Star Wars universe and sort of, write these really crazy stories, and since some of them like Luke was cloned at one point, and they had like all these really off the wall story ideas, and then they had like the whole Yuzong Gong invasion, and so I guess sort of collapsed under its own weight, really, and it just got so big and so heady that one author was doing one thing and then another author was doing another thing, and it didn't feel as cohesive.
Yeah, that happened.
Yeah, so love it or hate the decision, I think for the best after Disney took over and they sort of wiped the slate clean. I think that allowed them a sort of permission to kind of take a step back and say, okay, let's methodically do this. Let's get like a certain, set of authors and let them, slowly, roll out what would be considered canon, and do it in a much more, controlled manner rather than kind of, hiring as many people as possible and just dishing out stories like candy.
Yeah, even Lucasfilm, again, what Disney just did now is similar to what Lucasfilm did around the time of the prequels. Was like they knew they were going to get back in the game. They did the special editions, and that was the testing ground. Once they realized the special people were interested in watching these films again in a different manner, and they had the proper special effects, that was their green light to say, all right, let's go for the prequels now. So at that point, they realized they had to kind of rein it all back in. So there are these periods where they kind of loosen the reins, and then they tighten the reins, and they loosen them and tighten them, and that's how I see it.
All right. So let me get your thoughts on what would you say the main differences, like the writing style of the main theatrical releases, like the episode, like the episodic movies, like like The Last Jedi, Force Awakens. How would you compare that to some of the, and I know you haven't read all of the books, but how would you compare it to some of the books that have come out even recently? It seems like there's a focus on the books that goes on. So, and I guess this is the nature of a book over a movie, but the books seem to have a much more like concise, set story to tell, rather than recently some of the movies have been a bit more, loose in the terms of, actually telling, a one concise story. Like one of the books that I've read recently is called Star Wars Bloodline, which it details, this is post Disney takeover, so it is technically, it is canon now.
Okay.
And it deals with after the events of Return of the Jedi, but before the First Order, and it sort of deals with Leia and the revelation that the galaxy makes, with her, everyone basically coming to realize that she's Vader's daughter, and her career as a senator, after that news comes out, across the galaxy. And this is a very popular book. Like this one is written by an author Claudia Gray. It is like her really big book that is loved by a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And it just strikes me as like it's very different than the stories here versus the stories in the movies, where we know that it's not going to focus just on like Leia, her political career, obviously. But have you noticed any sort of big differences between the stories of the movies and the stories of the books, either EU or not?
Right. Well, obviously with the EU material, they don't have to stick to the script. There is no script. The novelizations based on the films, they have to stick to that original story, and you don't really have that much room to wander off into subplots that are not part of the original film. They do let them do a little bit. So, most of these writers, they're allowed to go into these little compartments and expand these characters a little more. But obviously, I would say 80% of the story being told has already been pre-written. So they don't have that freedom. The style of the books also is different, obviously, from the first one to the rest of them. The first one, even though it's not really Lucas writing it, but you can see so much of the original script. And that original script went in through so many variations of characters. Luke was a girl at one point. Luke was a boy at one point. Yeah. You have brothers, you have cousins, you have this, you have, if you read The Making of Star Wars by Rinsler, it's nauseating how many drafts and how things change so much and how certain ideas get shelved and they come back 20 years later for future usage. That first book still has a little bit of that. Like you mentioned, they talk about the Journal of the Wills, and then you never hear about him again. But it's like, as a fan, you're like, you put that in your pocket and you're like, are you a real Star Wars fan? Yeah, I'm a real Star. Do you know about the Journal of the Wills? What are you talking about, Journal of the Wills? Yeah, it's on the novel. It's right here. Look, it says Lucas's Journal of the Wills. How could you miss it? It's right there. But I saw the movie and it wasn't there. Hey, there you go. If you're in the club, you know about the Journal of the Wills. So, and that kind of stuff was not in the later films because, again, it didn't come so directly from Lucas. The writers were given just a script, who knows what version of the script, and they're told to run with it. And in all reality, it's just a part of the marketing and promotional department. It's just another way of making more money for the movie, to promote the movie. I can't really tell you how much they really, really think about, until later when they really, when the publishing arm of Lucasfilm started to grow like insanely big, just like the toy side grew and the video game side grew. The publishing arm started to grow so much that they had to really put some serious thought into it. And that's kind of how I feel right now. The EU, I've never followed it religiously. I've only picked up a few books because, in my opinion, there's just so much I cannot keep up with it. And I don't want to end up with contradictory material. With that said, I did read the Darth Plagueis book, the James Luceno book, which completely blew me away. It was so good. And it does happen sometimes that some of these books become so popular that they sometimes dip into them a little bit and they show up either in a Clone War episode or in a Rebels episode. Some of that stuff sometimes comes back, but they don't fully embrace it because I know to me that it looks like they still want to keep that separation between what level of canon you're dealing with. And they don't want to give the writers really too much power. You don't want to get their heads get too big like it's happened sometimes in the past and all of a sudden, oh boy, now we got to deal with this. But I mean, I know like their fans absolutely love like the Mara Jade character and the sons of Luke and Han and Leia and all these other descendants. And it's like, well, that's not how Kylo Ren shouldn't behave that way because if they had a son, it would be more like this guy. It's like,
yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned the Plagueis book because that's another one that's really popular. And I've read it myself. I've read it multiple times actually. And I'm not actually certain why they sort of, completely removed that one from, what technically is canon. I use quotes now, canon. Now, because it's such a good story. I really wish they would sort of, delve into that and sort of, bring a few of those ideas back because it really does. And I honestly thought they were going to do that with the character of Snoke, where they had. I really was feeling.
Hey, there's still one more chapter left. Yeah, we still have one more film.
If they go back, it's gonna feel very retcon, but I'll accept it. Sure, he is Darth Plagueis. So let me ask you: would you want to see these style of books, like the EU books, be adapted. And just now that we have Disney streaming, Disney Plus coming out, and they are going to need, material to fill up, to justify that price point that they're going to be asking for.
Oh yeah.
Would you want to see some of these, like some of the older books, kind of adapted, maybe into sort of either animated series or maybe like live action? Or would you want rather them to just, completely, keep this separate and start, fresh?
As long as it doesn't contradict stuff that's already out there, especially the movies, the stuff that's considered top tier canon, I don't mind seeing stories that are, obviously you don't want they have to be popular books that really, I guess, sold a lot and people had a good reaction to. Again, the Plagueis book to me seems it'd be perfect for a season of something. You can tell the whole Plagueis story, from beginning to end in a 10-episode arc. That would be perfect. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Does that involve negotiating with the writer? Probably not, because the writer has to sign off the rights and he has no control over that material after he wrote the story. So where's the downside to doing something like that? I don't know. I honestly don't see where the downside is. Again, not every single one, because there's stuff that's completely forgettable. Even the fans don't care about.
Yeah,
sure.
right. Yeah,
but it's there. It's already there.
Yeah, it's already out there. As much as I do enjoy a lot of the EU stuff, a lot of it was just so like off the wall and like really just too much. And that brings me to my point of the original Timothy Zahn Thrawn series, which was
the Thrawn character is in Rebels, right? Rebels, yeah, and there's a big crossover. Sometimes they do kind of dip into a little bit, so yeah. Why not?
They cherry pick, certain things that I mean, the great thing about the Thrawn thing that they brought in was because I didn't enjoy the original Thrawn trilogy. I thought he was like this, like he came up as like this like mustache twirling villain. Like, he was always like one step ahead of everyone else. Always, he always had this grand master plan. Like, you didn't really know I had two other starships in hiding. Some stuff like that. Like, he would come up with these like completely off the wall, plots, to foil all, the heroes and everything.
My problem with Thrawn is, again, I have never read the book, so I don't have the backstory of the character. I know he's very popular. I understand it. People go nuts when they see the action figure, when it was announced and everything, and when they previewed it on Rebels.
Yeah, I actually have them.
Yeah. My problem is that I was always under the impression that one of the characteristics of the Empire is that because they're the bad guys and they have to have some kind of socially unredeemable quality about them, and I thought the Empire's thing was humanity. They're pro-human, anti-alien, so that the majority of, you look at the Empire, you look in Star Wars, it's all humans. You look at, even now in the New Order, New Order is a musical group. The First Order. Again, you look at everybody in uniform, and it's a human thing. They have this pro-human thing happening. So I always find it kind of weird that you would have a character that is obviously from some kind of alien race that would be allowed to enter and get so high up in the ranks.
The great thing about the newer books is that they sort of at least they don't explain it, but they at least acknowledge it. Where they say that they give a few scenes of him being sort of mocked and sort of like discriminated against when he's in the Imperial Academy, when he's like found and he's brought into the Imperial Academy. There's a few other officers and other people around him in the academy that sort of really are put off by him, and they give all these scenes of him being sort of discriminated against and everything. So it's definitely there, and they definitely acknowledge it.
Okay.
Yeah. So as he's allowed to rise to the ranks, then it comes out even more. And so just a few other things I want to touch on before we wrap up. One of the novelizations of The Last Jedi, which is a much divisive movie that we all know, but the book, I think, and I want to say the book was written at least, because the Last Jedi script was written when they were filming The Force Awakens.
Yeah,
so the script of it was already finished. So I want to say that the Last Jedi novel at least was started when they had at least a firm, grasp on what the Last Jedi movie would look like. So the author, Jason Fry of The Last Jedi, he has this great scene in the beginning of The Last Jedi where it describes this fantasy that Luke is having.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when
his life would have been different.
Married. Yeah. He's basically what his life would have been like if the events went differently on A New Hope. this scene sort of redeemed the entire. Well, I can't say the movie because it's not even in the movie. I can't even say that. but if this scene were in the movie, it may have redeemed the entire movie for me. But the scene is great because it gives like this, like, you know, and again, I tie it back to where it says, you know, it does the thing I love in, you know, saga movies where it ties things together from previous movies, which doesn't happen in The Last Jedi, but I'm not going to go down that path. But there's a few things in the novelization of The Last Jedi where it adds in these scenes that aren't in the movie at all, that aren't even in deleted scenes, but it sort of fleshes out the character, and it gives you these sort of like glimpses into, you know, the characters like Luke, and, you know, what his life would have been like, you know, if he wouldn't have had his if he wouldn't have, you know, gone down the path that he did. So I was wondering if you've seen anything, if you've read any of the novelizations, if they've added something that you probably would have really appreciated that they would have been added to the movies themselves.
Well, it's a little hard to remember the prequels, and I know we're not going to go deep diving into those today, at least. From what I remember,
it's definitely a topic we'll probably come back to.
Yeah, that's definitely another trilogy we'll hit. But since we are kind of dipping a little bit into the current one, yeah, I remember that same scene you're talking about. It was very confusing at first when I was reading it. I'm like, wait a minute, what are they talking? Oh, then I understood what it was. And again, I'm back to that whole thing of, is this the writer or is this the script? Is it the writer or is it the script?
I'm sure there's the writer.
It's the writer. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But I had issues. I mean, obviously, I had so many issues with The Last Jedi. But I also had issues with the manner in the book was published and the book was marketed. I believe The Last Jedi might have been one of the first ones that they delayed it so much after the movie was released. And then they sold it as an expanded edition, I think, or a special edition.
Yeah, on the cover. I'm looking at it now. It says expanded edition.
Why? What makes it an expanded edition? Because a writer adds a little bit creativity into it? So did the other writers in the other previous 9 or 8 books or whatever. Again, my conspiracy theory here is that because they had a bad reaction to The Last Jedi, and because they knew they were about to get a weird reaction, not money, I'm not discussing money here, but I'm talking about the fan base splitting so much. I think they purposely held back the book and released it later because I think the writer had to go back in there and spruce it up somehow, put a little more things, explain a few things more deeply so that it kind of answers some of those questions that were loopholes in the script while we were watching the movie, and then you read the book as, oh, that's what they meant by that. That's what was happening. That's why that didn't happen that way. That's what that person was thinking. Again, I'm just pulling this out of thin air. I have no proof of this, but I'm thinking it's just too much of a coincidence that this book would be delayed so much and then try to answer a lot of the questions that were very critical as soon as the film came out.
I heard that too, and I was so on board with that theory. But the only thing is, I listened to the audiobooks of these things a lot. The only thing that poked a hole in that is that the audiobook was set for pre-sale when the movie was like already on. It was in theater, and it gives you the runtime. It tells you, how long the book is. Yes. So it says, the book is for like a so-and-so amount of time. And it was already, set up for pre-sale. It never changed from when the movie came out to when it was actually on sale. So, and there's no way they could have gotten the same author to re-narrate the entire book for the exact same amount of time.
Okay, that would make sense too. Yeah, that would make sense.
I was on board with the theory too. I was like, oh, they must be delayed because they probably want to fix some things in post and try to get as much as possible. But realistically, I looked at the audiobook narration of it, and it was never taken down. It was never changed or anything or modified. And the fact that to record an audiobook, it takes at least a few weeks to get scripted, directed, and cut and edited and everything. So
maybe that's exactly why it took an extra 3 months to put it out, because they had to match that time and those page numbers. Yes, we're going down the rabbit hole now. We're all the way down the rabbit hole.
All right, so the last thing I wanted to bring up before we can put a pin in this one, because it's definitely something maybe we can come back to to discuss a few of the other books. One of the books where I read is a different sort of book. It's called From a Certain Point of View. And now this book is interesting because It plays sort of with the idea of, what's canon and what's not canon. And it sort of gives you these sort of short stories and sort of, I guess, like brief glimpses into different perspectives of characters. And even just from the name, from a certain point of view, is obviously the line, that Obi-Wan throws Luke in Return of the Jedi. But it goes through different scenes in A New Hope. And it gives you sort of like a different perspective, a sort of a different like look at, the scenes that we're all familiar with. And some of them are really serious. Some of them are actually really sobering and and it's almost tragic. There's the story about Bail Organa and his wife basically sits, their last moments on.
I have that book, and I only read one story because we were doing the episode on droids. On droid rights.
Oh yeah, right.
These are not the droids you're looking for, or the we don't serve their kind. But I want to read the rest of it because there's so many.
No, you really should. I mean, there's some in here that you are just like kind of like throwaways, like okay, he's cute, but move on. Mm-hmm. But some of them are really, really good. There's a short story about one of the rebels they're on Yavin base, mm-hmm. and they know that the Empire is coming, and his wife is pregnant. She's giving birth. So he sends I might have the order of the events wrong, but he sends his wife and daughter to Alderaan as sort of safe haven. What could happen in Alderaan. So he sends his wife and child there.
Sounds like a Twilight Zone episode.
And the news breaks that Alderaan was destroyed, and and I'm saying it, sort of a light tone, but the book was really, I was like, oh man, it's horrible. And so it's this type of book where I really really give props to the different authors that contributed to it, because even though it knows that itself is not going to be okay, this isn't canon, isn't obviously officially recognized, they still went about it in a way that was like, it can give this different perspective on all these different scenes from the movie. And so, and again, it would be something like this where I would love to see adapted to maybe like a short, like a comic series, or not maybe a comic, like an anime series or something. I could really see this on Disney Plus as like a limited run or something. It's something I really recommend you definitely pick up, because it's, if you're a fan of the original movie, A New Hope, it gives you this wild view of all these different characters from different points of view.
The only other EU that I actually do remember reading that I was okay with, I enjoyed it, there was one about the Death Star, the building of the Death Star. There was one about Obi-Wan, like what is Obi-Wan doing in Tatooine? And there was I think called Rise of Darth Vader or something, which is supposed to be Darth Vader right after Revenge of the Sith.
Rise of the Sith, or
Rise of Darth Vader, or something like that. It's like one of his first missions, hunting down Jedi.
Right.
Which were pretty good. Now, again, I don't remember the one about the Death Star might be a little contradictory now with Rogue One, so there might be some contradictory information. But overall, still, the Darth Plagueis is the big one. That's the one that keeps standing out in my mind.
Yeah, and that is, I'm a member of a few different, Star Wars Facebook groups and everything. And that's another one that you hear constantly over and over again, and how much people really enjoyed that book, and how they really wanted, especially because the connective tissue in Revenge of the Sith, where they is directly mentioned. So in fact, now that I'm thinking about it, that would, because in Revenge of the Sith they mention Darth Plagueis, so Darth Plagueis is technically still in canon. But it's just the fact that book itself...
It has to be. Well, yeah, it's the book. But it doesn't have to necessarily be the book, but it's the character does exist.
The character exists. Yeah, right.
But no, this is, like I said, this was great. And hopefully we can hit a couple of the other ones a little more cohesively, like the prequels. You can hit those two at some point. And all of the new ones, including Force Awakens, Rogue One, Solo, and we already kind of did a little preview of The Last Jedi. So definitely want to return to this one. What about you?
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. And I have the only prequel book I don't have is the Revenge of the Sith one, so I definitely have to pick that up. I went back and found the hardcover cover copies at a thrift store of Episode 1 and 2 of the novelizations. I still have to get Revenge of the Sith.
Well, the prequel ones I remember, because there was so much hype about the prequels, especially with the first movie. There was like multiple covers, and you can get multiple covers. I think they kind of stopped that silliness now because people are like, no, we're not spending We're not buying it 7 times.
They have like all the faces. They have like all the characters' faces and everything. Yeah.
But definitely, this is something that we got to return. So thanks, Steve, for bringing this subject up and helping me, put together this show.
No problem. It scratches my Star Wars nerd itch. So
cool. We'll talk to you later.
Yep. Talk to you later, everyone.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed today's show. We went over a number of Star Wars books, specifically the movie-related books, the ones that are expanded on and you're able to get a little more information than just what you saw on the screen. Those are the ones that I usually, hit no matter what. I'm not a big EU person, but I always hit, the movie adaptation books of whatever happens to be out there, just to compare and contrast a little bit to see if there are any deleted scenes, because sometimes they do go off a script that had more scenes. So that is a way of kind of trying to get, those additional scenes back, for the fans at least. And hopefully we'll hit this subject again soon in the future, where we can hit maybe some of the prequel books this time, or maybe a little more of the more current ones. So on behalf of everybody here, thank you for listening, and we will see you here soon at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
No.
I thought not. It's not a story the Jedi would tell you. It's a Sith legend. Darth Plagueis was a dark lord of the Sith, so powerful and so wise, he could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life. He had such a knowledge of the dark side, he could even keep the ones he cared about from dying.
He could actually save people from death.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
What happened to him?
He became so powerful. The only thing he was afraid of was losing his power, which eventually, of course, he did. Unfortunately, he taught his apprentice everything he knew. Then his apprentice killed him in his sleep. Ironic. He could save others from death, but not himself.
If you would like to subscribe to our show, send us messages, or see video links to some of the topics we talked about today, please visit our homepage at geekfestrants.com or our YouTube channel, Facebook page, or iTunes at GeekFest Rants.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
GeekFest Rants is produced by Carlos Perón, copyright 2019.
This broadcast is part of the IC Robots Radio Network. Visit icrobots.com for this and many other nerd/nostalgia related podcasts. You won't be sorry for long.